And he said during one of his exorcisms, the thing was being super stubborn. And he applied this piece of the shroud. And he said the demon manifested and just went rigid, and it almost like it was compelled to do so. It put itself into the shape of the body on the shroud, like with the hands crossed over. And again, it's not like it's an image. I mean, it was just like a thread, and he didn't tell the thing where it came from, and he just touched it, and it immediately like made itself shroud shaped and was really like, restricted. And I was like, that is crazy.
Hello and welcome to another Parousia Podcast. I'm Charbel Raish, your host. Today we have the founder of The Gracious Guest. His name is Mike Creavey, and he's joining me from the United States. I had the honor of being on his podcast recently, and it was great. We discussed so many different things, not just my testimony, but the shroud and so many other topics. And his podcast and his work covers so many interesting topics, and I can't wait to introduce you to him and learn a bit about his faith journey, but also his great apostolate that he's doing. So let's dive in. Mike, welcome to the podcast.
Hey, Charbel, it's so great to be on. And I always like to ask you, what time is it there right now?
Yes, it's actually, so the time of this recording, it's a Wednesday, and it's in the afternoon we're recording this. So
okay,
1 o'clock.
This is my last thing before I go to bed on Tuesday. Yes. There's always a little bit of time travel in this, which is fun. So
absolutely. Look, it was great to get to know a bit about you, and when you interviewed me, and I started to discover more about your work, and I wanted to, I guess, introduce you to our audience and let people know about what you're doing, because it is fascinating. But before I do, a little bit about yourself. And you're a cradle Catholic, is that correct? And
that's right.
And have you always practiced your faith? Was it something that you were always there, or was there a time where you sort of had a turning point or a realization of your faith?
I think it's a little bit of all of it. Someone I just heard, I forget who it was, someone will remind me at some point, but I like that answer, when someone says, I'm Catholic, but I don't really practice. And the good answer to that, of course, is, how do you expect to get any good at it? Which I think is sort of the story of my life, like to the extent that I, have found myself at these different periods of life practicing it, actually, in fact, more, lo and behold, the Lord takes me where I didn't expect to go, So I will say, I think, I was very blessed growing up to have my immediate family's all Catholic. We have a lot of extended family who are not Catholic, but different, Christian denominations. Our area is not predominantly Catholic. So I think one benefit of that was I grew up in a real ecumenical, I think, kind of environment. Most of my friends as well, weren't Catholic growing up. And I don't think that really ever tempted me to sort of change to a different sort of denomination, or certainly not to a different religious faith altogether. But, it tended to make me realize that, hey, there's a lot of people who don't believe what we believe, so there's probably some studying I should do to get to know that a little bit better, And I don't really remember doing that much or very intently until college. And I went to Catholic University of America in Washington, D.C., didn't realize how sort of special, I think, of a place that really is until I was already there for a while, being the sort of official papally charted, university in the United States. And in a way, I kind of got spoiled there pretty quick, because it was like, every day there was something else, like 2 or 3 different big things going on. I had my RA the one year knocks on my door. I'm writing a paper. He's like, hey, you want to go to a Maronite mass? And I was like, what are those? I know what a mass is. What's Maronite mean? He goes, come on, I'll tell you about it. So I find myself not just at any Maronite mass, but the patriarch was there with this whole entourage from Lebanon, and I'm just like, this is different and really kind of cool. And to this day, there's a real special place in my heart, for all of our Easternite brothers and sisters. And so my eyes were really open at Catholic U. I was discerning more and more, discerning the priesthood. And that was where I think, I really took this deeper plunge into more of the intellectual side of studying the faith. I'll go on forever if I just keep it. So I
No,
don't know
this
if
is
there was
interesting. And
something else about that you wanted to ask, or
but this is part of. Were you so single? So you were discerning priesthood
yeah.
in tertiary education at this point. So you graduated
Hmm.
from high school, working.
Yeah.
What were you
Well,
doing at the time?
I was doing ROTC actually. I was Army ROTC to prepare to be an Army officer. I don't know if that came up
Wow.
when I spoke to you before or not, but there was a lot of I just said a lot of currents, probably going on, all of which will be revealed to be, God willing, on the other side of the veil. But some of which I think I can see now. Um, and it was funny because it wasn't my first choice, for college. I had different paths I looked at, and it's just funny looking back on it. I can't really imagine any other way that things could have gone, for me and my faith journey. And what was funny was it was a combination of, I think, the practical side of, like I said, some of those questions I had,
Hmm.
questions about everything, questions about the world, questions about church teaching on, you name it. But then coupled with the I think a real awareness. This was just a few years after 9/11. So I
Okay.
went into college into this military prolonged military training sort of path, knowing full well, and all of us did, that we would likely end up in Afghanistan or Iraq, or somewhere in a conflict zone. Um, and I think all of us did. I don't know of anyone who didn't when it was all said and done. But I think trying to be serious, as serious as a 19-year-old can be about trying to, imagine what it's potentially going to be like to risk your life and that kind of thing. Um, I imagine just that alone
Wow.
probably, brought up some preemptive questions, or just questions about life and good and evil, and all these kinds of things. So and for whatever reason, I just really found that the church fathers, the readings in the office of readings, just
Mm,
these
love
excerpts that
them.
I would stumble across, and really, maybe most importantly, getting in with a group of other young guys at Catholic U who were really living their faith intently, to where I don't know that I was ever pressured beyond the normal level of anybody else, basically, when it came to like living your faith is weird, that kind of thing. I maybe thought that a little bit, but once I started seeing these guys who are playing sports, going to movies, doing normal things, they're not all like clustered away somewhere, secret ceremonies or something, or
Yeah.
doing something strange. I really felt a sense of camaraderie with them. um, and sowing the seeds really for I think what would really flourish a lot, in a lot of ways, especially when I was in seminary later, which I'll get to.
Yeah. So how long
But
were you
yeah.
with the army there? How long? How long
So
were
that
you?
was I commissioned in the Army right after I graduated college. Went off and did all the follow on training and stuff that you do after that. So about an 18-month window
Okay.
after college, I was mostly doing Army stuff, and I had basically been applying for the seminary my senior year of college, and I kind of just tapped the brakes on it right at the end. And I told the vocation director, I said, "Look, I've been, preparing for 4 years, to be this Army officer, to be this military leader. I just really feel like I have to kind of see this through a little bit more, before
Mm.
I kind of switch paths, so to speak." So I like to say I was continuing to discern, though, the whole way through there. And so if you add up that additional time, and then I was in Iraq for a year. I had a deployment there in 2008,
Wow. What
and
was that like? Can you share a little bit about
well,
how?
thankfully for me, it was you know nothing too traumatizing for me. Now I have close family, a lot of friends, a lot of soldiers that I served with, who saw a lot worse than I did in terms of
Mm,
the combat environment, closer calls, or at least more tangibly close calls. But I often say, and this has been something that I'm grateful to, my brother, who's also in the Army, and a lot of others, who would hear me basically trying to downplay my own experience, and forced me over a series of years to be like, don't do that. They were very good about like, that's, I know you think that's humble, but that can actually be, not an honest, sort of processing of it. So I really kind of learned, I think, through them to say, well, yeah, you know what? Like, yes, others had it worse than me. That's usually the case for pretty much everybody except the person who had it worse than everybody else, I guess, in the grand scheme of things. There's always someone who had it worse than you almost. But, I mean, it's not normal, to, jump under your bed basically because rockets are coming in as you're sitting there eating, food out of a styrofoam takeaway thing that you just left, from this dining hall that's now being rocketed. That's scary, And what was amazing to me was, I think one of the biggest things it taught me was that in terms of faith, I think, you can prepare all you want, and you should, all of us should. But at the end of the day, at least in my experience, it was just this real tangible experience of, you just don't know. You don't know until that moment, and the circumstances of it, how your body's just going to react, the biochemical reactions that are just happening, no matter how much training you've had, And I don't remember very often feeling any kind of like crippling fear. The ironic thing is there have been things since my deployment, just periods of anxiety or periods of spiritual darkness that, I sometimes, I would trade this for a day back in my deployment, and not to make light of that at all, but, it's more, human life's more complicated, right, than we think sometimes, and physical fear and trauma, is one thing, but also, that emotional fear or those spiritual desolations we can experience sometimes can really go deeper, So I was very fortunate. One of the things I was most blessed with was I had pretty regular access to sacraments, which, one of the tragedies is, a lot of people in those environments, if you're in the most dangerous situation, you also have the least access, to regular priests visiting. So it was a catch-22. I was in a very sort of high visibility, highly targeted area, but for that very reason, we had some of the best defenses, and also just more people around, more access to, some chaplains and stuff like that. So that was something I took advantage of as much as I could.
You remember that for the rest of your life. I mean, it is a big deal to go to the other side of the world and basically be there and to be so close to the combat zone, and but knowing why you're there and you've come back, you've come back.
Right.
So tell me about that. You come back from Iraq. You say Iraq. I love this because Americans and Australians here we say Iraq or Iraq.
And I try to catch myself all the time. We had, by the way, we had a little quick funny story about right before we deployed. We had our operations sort of officer, was my direct boss. He goes up to the board. I should do it on the board behind me, but he goes up and he writes on the board, IRAQ. And he says, the country we're going to, and he's like really serious. He goes, it's called Al-Iraq. He goes, it is not. And he turns around and he writes EYE-RACK. He's like, it is not Iraq. That's not how you pronounce it. So he was trying to get everybody cured of that. I don't think it took for a lot of people.
Now, tell me about you. So you did spend time in the seminary. So you come back. Did you actually further discern and say, I need to try this out? So you did enter the seminary?
Yeah. Well, it's funny because I was actually two fun things that I was doing in my spare time here and there from my deployment, was I was pursuing the all the paperwork and the payments and stuff for a Holy Land pilgrimage with Steve Ray. Steve and Janet Ray do the Footprints of God pilgrimages.
No one does it as good as them. They're amazing.
Oh my gosh! And I've gotten to know Steve over the years, and he's wonderful. I still use his videos in my classes sometimes because they're fun. But I found this really ironic situation because my brother and I were both going to go together, and he was also in the Army. He had deployed for a year and a half before I was in Iraq. Then he was there. Or then I went there, then he went again after me. So we were like alternating for 4 years, basically going back and forth. And while I was there, I'm coordinating with him through email to basically, hey, we've these young guys, we're not attached in any way. We have deployment money, saved up because we can't spend it really on anything. Let's do a Holy Land pilgrimage. And it was to Greece and Turkey and Israel and Egypt, a cruise, and like you'd go inland and everything. But the irony was I was planning all of this and doing the itinerary and everything further away from home than we would be, on that trip, which felt a little strange. So I'm doing all of it from the biblical land of Ur, right up the river from where Abraham, was from. And even then, like that's probably, people always ask about the deployment, and they're usually wondering, I think, about, the toll of it and processing it. But honestly, the biggest things I remember were, it was the first time I was really in biblical lands, and that just was, I never got tired of reflecting on that, or like I read the book of Tobit while I'm there, because I'm right along the Euphrates and the Tigris. And, it's there's, how I think in the story, there's a fish that starts to like get his leg and it's like swallowing his leg or something. And everyone always says, oh, that's hyperbole. And like, I don't know, because we had a guy catch like a 6-foot fish in the Euphrates, like he's holding it up on this line, and it's as tall as him. So, but that was amazing that, I got to go home right around Christmas 2008. And then in March of 2009, my brother and I went on that pilgrimage, which took us back to, parts of the Middle East. Then we ended up in Egypt. And so just, to this day, that year and a half that I got to go to all these places that are in Scripture, in so many different places in Scripture, and I have, my students, we have coming up now on the story of the Babylonian exile. We have a baby boy on the way I was telling you about before we started recording. And
congratulations.
Naming him, thank you, naming him Daniel. So I'm thinking like that happened right down the river, from where, from where I lived for almost a year. So that was the whole time, I'm discerning the priesthood and feeling this reinforcement, at least in the need to go into seminary to discern it full time, as they say, and I try to pass this advice on to other young men that, going to seminary doesn't mean you're going to be a priest, of course, and that really helped me to kind of see that, and there may have been, back in the old days, and there may have been a stigma. I've heard sometimes the old timers said there could be a stigma if you went and then you left. Someone thought something was wrong with you and all that, if you went to the seminary and left. But I think we've done a really good job, at least where I've visited, in the seminary experience I had, of trying to encourage, young men to take it seriously and to, go there and spend this time to discern this full time, which is what I got to do, which was great.
How long were you there in the seminary?
Yeah, so I studied for the Diocese of Harrisburg, Pennsylvania. It's the diocese we're in now, the one I grew up in. And I went to Mount St. Mary's in Emmitsburg, which is a neat connection because I've been showing this off lately. I have this first class relic here of St. Elizabeth Ann Seton. And I don't know where my mother-in-law got it, but at some point in her life it came to her and she gave it to us. So I've been really... I don't carry it around with me day to day. I keep it at home, safe and sound. But I grew up going to St. Elizabeth Ann Seton Church. It was one of the first churches named for her. And she's, one of the first, I always get the order of these things mixed up. I think the first U.S. citizen canonized was St. Francis Xavier Cabrini, unless I'm mistaken. But Elizabeth Ann Seton, the first sort of kind of natural born U.S. citizen, to be canonized. And, we grew up just about a half hour, give or take, north of Emmitsburg, where she had her whole, operation set up, where in large part Catholic education in the United States really kind of began and flourished from Emmitsburg. And it's a place that's charged with so much spiritual power and meaning and history. And, my bishop, at the time, Bishop Rhodes, who's now the bishop out at Notre Dame, out there at in Fort Wayne, South Bend in the U.S., he was our bishop at the time and sent me there. And so I was there for 1 year. And by the end of it, it's interesting. Like I said before, they tend to advise you to do it for at least 2 years. But at this point, I had been actively discerning for, 3.5. pretty seriously, almost 4 years. Actually, no, about 4 years. You know, one of which was in a combat deployment, life or death. You know, so I felt like I was at the age where I was 26 at the time. I thought I had really, um, very sincerely, you know, discerned it, and with some great people, you know, and the most important takeaway I think of all was just being in that environment,
Mm.
with these other young men, you know, who helped me to really find, you know, my faith in this deep way. I think that I knew at the time, you know, and know even more now, was going to be the basis, you know, for whatever came next.
Yes.
And honestly, the best advice I had there was my spiritual director. Have you ever spoken to Father Leo Patalinghug at all? He's
Yes,
a
yes.
priest. He
He's
does
been out
yeah.
twice. Yeah, he's a good friend of
Okay.
ours.
That's wonderful. Father Leo was there at the time. He was
Wow.
at the seminary. That was where he was stationed, and
Oh, that
that
would
was,
have
I
been
think,
awesome. Did he cook for the
that
seminarians at the time?
he did, and that was
Yeah.
he was my spiritual director, and so he was the
Wow.
same. It was the same year he beat Bobby Flay in the Food Network, you
Wow.
know,
When he really shot
competition.
up the
So
fame.
it was this, yeah. And it was funny because they told us, you know, like, you got to pick a spiritual director. They had, you know, were explaining a little bit of how that worked in the first week or so. And he gave a homily that just really struck me. And I thought, you know, I think he's the one for me for whatever reason. I just, you know, felt that. And I went and I asked him, and you know, we had a good laugh because I said, so, like, what do I do now? Do I, like, give you a rose or something? Like, is there, like, I said, is there some sort of procedure? You know, like, you're the one, you know, like some, you know, bachelorette TV show or something.
Yeah.
But no, he was wonderful. And we'd meet, you know, I think you'd meet like once a week or every other week with your spiritual director, and you had your formation advisor for more general things. And, um, but at one point I was stuck on this whole, you know, am I being called to marriage or called to the priesthood? And I just, how do you know? How do you know that? And he basically gave me this assignment to basically go partake in what he described as a holy fantasy. And I'm like, what is this? And he told me to basically do not back to back for 2 hours straight, but you know, sequential holy hours, like holy hour today and holy hour tomorrow, you know, because we would try to do one every day.
Mm.
And he let it be up to me what order I wanted to do it in. But he basically said, spend as much of that hour as you possibly can imagining, because, you know, he knew I'm very imaginative. I kind of live in my own
Yes.
head sometimes. And, you know, a drama guy, I did music and theater in high school and all this. So he's like, he goes, imagine every tiny little minute detail you possibly can, and like run it like a movie through your head of everything you imagine would happen from now until your death if you're called to the priesthood. And then I want you to do the same thing for married life. And I've never heard anybody else advise that. So I always tell, like, I share this too. And I did it, and it was exhausting because I really tried to be as specific, and I tried to think of the good, the bad. It wasn't all sugar coated. I'm trying to imagine like illness and, you know, persecution and like all these kinds of things. And what blew my mind was in both of them, the ending was the same, where, you know, at
Okay.
the end of it, I basically was in a deathbed with, you know, a handful of people that I really loved that were there with me as I crossed over. And it like wrecked me, you know, where it really hit me that, you know, here this whole time, a lot of the fear in this discernment has been characterized by this sort of, when I say, you know, demonic, not like I was, you know, full on demonic oppression or something, but this, you know, this kind of, you know, one way or the other, hell influenced, deceptive kind of, you know, fear of, you're going to be alone, you're going to be alone, you're going to be alone.
Mm.
And like, nobody's ever really alone, first of all, you know, and it just really kind of took the pressure off me. And it also gave me this, you know, what I laughed with him about later was, uh, you know, I had all this pressure on myself of like, I've got to get this right now. And what really clicked too with it was, you know, well, you know, if the Blessed Mother appears to me today and says, Mike, it turns out, yes, you're called to the priesthood, I still have to study here for years, you know, and then
Yes.
it's not like I can run to the bishop and be like, I'm ready. And likewise, you know, if I'm called to marriage, I said, I don't have like girlfriends outside, like waiting. You know, like I said, you know, if she exists, that's part of a path, you know, somewhat down the road. I need to still grow more either way. And so those were just some big takeaways from the experience that, again, part of the reason I always tell guys, like, if you're even remotely thinking about it, do, because it's
Yeah.
just, there's nowhere
Good
else that's
point.
going to give you that opportunity, you know, to really
Did,
pray about it that way, that intensely,
so is that so? It was a solid year then in the seminary, or
Yeah.
was it a bit longer?
Yeah, no, it was one full academic year with, a
Okay,
little bit before that, to kind of prep and everything. So, yeah.
sure, yeah.
Yeah.
Did you know it was 20 years ago as of this record? I was in the
Yeah.
seminary myself, and
Oh, okay. Yeah.
I remember it was a year. It was a year in the Sydney Archdiocesan Seminary, and then I
Okay.
was under the Maronite bishop in the Maronite eparchy, and I was sent to Lebanon and study there for further discernment.
Oh, wow.
And it's interesting because within the Maronite rite, you actually can be married and be a priest. So
Right.
you've got to get married first. And I knew from day one I was called to marriage, but I remember thinking, well, I can be both. Why don't I just do both? But I just
Right.
was struggling with. I did that whole exercise of imagining myself as a priest and then imagining myself as a married man and fast forwarding and seeing what that did. And it was like the marriage was constantly there. It never left me.
Right.
It was there from day one, before, during, and obviously after. But then, that idea of the priesthood was I was there to discern if that was true. And I love the seminary. And I almost felt like, because we were told we were going to go to Rome to study, and I was excited to do that.
Mm.
But I knew I would be lying to myself if I was just going to study in Rome and then pull out, and then go get married. And
Right.
that wouldn't be fair. So I had to be honest. But it took a good amount of spiritual direction and prayer and discernment to say, wow, because you're choosing between two
Yeah.
goods. And I highly
Right.
recommend anyone, a man or woman, think about that religious life, the vocation and priesthood, being in a religious life, whether it's a brother or a nun, and think about that. Consider that first, because the thing that got me over the line was you can try out the seminary, or for discernment. You can't try out marriage, and you
Right.
shouldn't be doing that. And that's it. Okay, look,
Yeah.
and I'm glad it's in that order, and
Right.
that worked.
Yeah. That's awesome.
Now, so tell me, after the seminary, did you? Because I remember my time out of the seminary. It's almost like going back to like you're starting all over again. So what did you
Yeah.
do, like career-wise,
Well, it's
work, and then meeting you're married now, and
yes. Yeah.
meeting your wife? Tell us about this phase.
Yeah, and I'll shorten some of it a little bit, because I like to highlight, those experiences in particular. But it was funny because, yeah, I absolutely was like, okay, now what? And I was looking at a lot of different things. I don't remember how long I seriously thought about maybe doing some government work, because at this point I'm still in the reserves. All through seminary I was still in the Army Reserves, and then the National Guard, for our state here in Pennsylvania, which, it's that 1 weekend a month,
Okay.
they always say 1 weekend a month, 2 weeks a year, for like your 2 week annual training. Yeah, but you're getting emails, you're getting voicemails from your commander. You have to, track down this soldier and they're not responding to their, it's, you're basically trying to live out like all these Army things with people who all have other things to do. And so do you, because everybody's got different jobs or they're students. And, so I was still doing that. That was keeping me pretty occupied. I didn't deploy again. There were a few times that we thought that we might have to, but that never came to fruition, which I was okay with that, but yeah, it was because I was still in those circles, that it would come up like, hey, there's this contracting job or there's this thing. And sometimes it would be a move to DC or something. And I wanted to be back where I'd grown up, around family and everything. And so this goes on for a few months. And then my grandmother, God rest her soul, it was, she got me into this. My grandmother sees a ad in a neighboring parish bulletin for a youth ministry position. Because I know there's the old trope too, that like, okay, well, step 1, go to seminary. Step 2, leave seminary because you're not called to the priesthood. Step 3, become a youth minister, which that's not always what happens, but it does happen a lot.
Yeah.
So, and it happened to me, but, and it was interesting because I don't know if I ever went to youth group at all. Like in high school, it wasn't on my radar. I wasn't really super interested in it. And in my parish, at least at the time, most of the kids in the parish were, the kind of the bigger school district, in that town. And we're like the next town over. So, we were welcome members of the parish, but just as a kid, it just felt like a clique, and maybe that wasn't fair, but that's kind of, I was like, that's all the kids from that town and not our town. And, I'm not really part of that. So, funny enough, when I had been in some Army training just to kind of help out at the local parish, one of the things they had available was helping with their religious ed program. And in that diocese, it was in Arizona, they confirmed later. We do it here in eighth grade, when they're about 14. In that diocese, they do it like their junior year of high school, 17 years old, 16, 17. And so I ended up helping out for 4 or 5 months at this parish, largely Hispanic parish right near the Mexican border. And dozens of kids, very thriving youth ministry program. It was the Life Teen, program.
Sure. Very
And
familiar. Right.
it was my first kind of foray into it. And I was mostly just doing some religious ed stuff, some CCD classes, some topics and stuff, because I was still really fired up about theology. Now I'm thinking of getting a master's degree because, seminary or not, this is all kind of before that. And then, of course, after seminary, I really wanted to make sure I pursued getting a master's degree in theology. And so I'm discerning all this kind of stuff. Now I'm doing youth ministry full time, did that for a couple of years. And at the second parish I was working at a couple of years later, my friend who's the religious education director at the parish, she keeps bringing up, this girl, Christine. She's like, I think you, Christine. And it's not like you should date her kind of thing. It's like, I would tell a joke or something, or she's like, man, you have a sense of humor a lot like her, which is funny because we don't really. But lo and behold, Christine was, she just graduated from college. So I'm 5 years older than her.
Yep.
I've been out of seminary now for about 2 years at this point. And she's about to leave to go start her grad program at Penn State. And it's a master's and PhD program that she's going to do. And she's teaching seventh grade religious ed, fourth or fifth grade. And our mutual friend pulls me away from some youth ministry event I'm prepping for, pulls her out of her classroom to meet in the church. And she says to this day she thought I was awkward. And I'm like, well, you were right. We all know that now. So the rest is basically history. We started working together. I honestly, I reached out to her a few times to help with some events because I just felt like she was pretty much the only 20-something girl that I knew who was really into her faith and was really mature and responsible and all this.
Where are you at this point?
So,
what area in America?
So we're back, our home area, kind of Harrisburg, Pennsylvania area, sort of south central Pennsylvania, not far from Gettysburg, where the big Civil War battle was. We're right up the road from there, and Emmitsburg, they're all pretty close. It's basically right between Philadelphia and Pittsburgh, right on the turnpike, right there, right in the middle of the state. And so we started dating, and then she moved, up to Penn State, which is further up, right in the center of Pennsylvania, about 2 hours away. And we did the distance thing for a while, got engaged, got married. I moved up there, and they didn't have any ministry jobs. And I was really at this crossroads of now I've kind of committed. I'm doing my master's degree at this point through Franciscan University's distance program.
Fantastic.
And I'm like, this is, I'm kind of all in now. It's with each passing year, it's too late to go back to government work. Yeah. I was just getting out.
By the way? How long were we talking? So did you get married from the moment you met her?
No. Well, so we dated for about a year and a half, or no, we dated for about a year, and then we got engaged, and then we were engaged for 2 years.
Okay.
Because we got engaged right when she was kind of starting her master's program, and then I moved up there a year later. So we were distance engaged, and now with just a third one on the way with the 2 kids. Now I go to bed. I'm usually asleep by this point. I can't imagine driving 2 hours back and forth. I mean, that's for 20s and early 30 somethings. So, we got married. We had the ceremony and everything back in our home area where our families are at the church we actually met at, which was appropriate, and where I had been working, and then, but we were living now up by Penn State, and there's a little Catholic high school up there that took a risk on me of hiring me to be for a while, their only theology teacher for all 4 grades.
Wow.
And it was a very, very small school, about 150 students, but they were all mine. I had, 4 years of theology with them. So it was a steep learning curve because I didn't have any background. I had taught different ways, presentations. I had taught things in the Army, but I had no sort of secondary education training or any of that. And, but it really became this passion for education. Um, and it kind of fused this experience I had at that point with young people, into this more academic environment, and then more the involvement with families and stuff like that too. And now I'm this is my 10th year of teaching high school. I've been at the school I'm at now for the past 5 years.
Wow. Okay.
And really gotten into classical education. A lot of I basically spend what little spare time I have on the side reading everything I can about education philosophy, Catholic education. Because I feel like that's kind of what it's all about, right? This full formation of like in the seminary. Did you guys have the 4 pillars model of like human formation, intellectual, spiritual, and what's the fourth?
Would it be in the pastoral or
or yes, right. And I think there's a real I think that dovetails nicely with a lot of what I've been working on the side, which I know we're going to get into here too as well, of kind of that integrated whole person formation, and that's something I've really learned along the way, and wish I had when I was in high school.
Fascinating. Now you have so a couple of kids, a third one on the way. As you say, how old are your children now? As of this?
Oh, it's flying by. So our eldest, she'll be 7 in a couple of weeks. We have a 3.5-year-old. So the 2 girls. I even have a friend got me the T-shirt. Looks like a Top Gun logo, and it says "Girl Dad." And then we found out we have a boy on the way, and I was like, "Oh my, we got to change things up a little bit." I said, now we got some diversity in the household here, so we're excited. Just it's a whole new experience. So, but and they're so excited, for a little brother. So we'll see how I'll give you an update before too long.
You're on now. So are you still teaching now? Did you say? Are you still teaching theology at full time?
Yes, yeah, and I also teach for Homeschool Connections as well, which some of the audience will be aware of.
Absolutely, we'll put links. They're great. They're doing great work.
It's fun. I was just I had a class this afternoon. I'm doing a Catholic social teaching course. At the time of this recording, the Didache series. I feel humbled because I'm apparently following in Trent Horn's footsteps. I've never met Trent. We've had some email correspondence over the years. I'm a huge fan of his.
Yes.
And he got super busy with everything he's doing. So he had taught some of these the Midwest Theological Forum has these Didache series textbooks. Scott Hahn edited a bunch of them, and they're so good. So the social teaching,
the scripture one, the blue,
yes,
and then the orange one on the church, and the green one on church history, and I remember, I taught a bit of that. That's awesome.
That's Mike Aquilina did the social teaching one, and it's I mean, I've seen a lot of Catholic social teaching textbooks, and it's not to go off too much on that tangent, but just not to say anything negative about them. I mean, I've never really encountered I'm sure they're out there, but I've never come across like a heterodox one or something. But it's just sometimes it's just loaded with like that Shutterstock kind of like the photos that are instantly irrelevant the moment you like you have the teens shopping because that's what the teens do, and they're like it looks like a 90210 like picture, and it's just like a kid sees that and it's like, oh, but if you put in like a Rembrandt, or just something really timeless, that's not ephemeral, So that's just the structure of it. I think those texts are wonderful. So kudos to Homeschool Connections for bringing the Didache courses back. Yeah.
Amen. Now on the side, let's talk about this. So you have a number of podcasts. Is that right? So can you tell us? You have a website. Yeah. What is the name of that website?
So it's thegraciousguest.org.
Right. And what does that do?
It's showing up more like in searches, which is nice because for the longest time I was like, should I rename it? Because you do like Google searches or look on Facebook and you'd get stuff about like how to throw the perfect house party, like did I brand myself wrong? But long story short with that was, going back to the maybe more of the dramatic flair. I've always loved theater. A little side thing I do intend to do, I just don't have time right now to do it, is I'm trying to get more into audiobook recording as well, because I finally accepted that. I don't go around touting it, because that would be weird. But I finally accepted that there does seem to be enough, there are enough people out there who have told me that they like the sound of my voice, that I'm like, okay, well, maybe it's a gift I should use for good, because I get annoyed. I'm the one who hears it all the time, right? Because I always tell
I
people
could
like, yeah,
see
you might
that. I
like
could
my,
see.
yeah, it's like,
No,
you
but
might like my
your
voice,
voice.
but yeah, it's like, but imagine thinking in it all the time too, because I hear myself like, but like I said, I did theater. We did some home movies and stuff like a lot of people do. Like I've always had a creative bent. I love to write. I put out a little book a couple years ago. All of this is linked on the website too, but a narrative reflections of the apostles, kind of last moments, sort of
Yeah.
reimagining their final act of courage kind of thing. Just a little
Wow.
kind of devotional volume, basically goes through each
Sure.
one of the apostles. So all these different little projects. And as my faith was really starting to grow in college, I really hit the podcast world hard. Like I
Mm.
had the old iPod, the wheel on it and everything.
I remember that.
And
Yeah.
I would download, I would max the thing out on Catholic Answers Live episodes,
Yes.
right? And and so that was a big one, but all these Catholic faith forming things had just really become available
Excellent.
in that mass format, and so I just listened to a ton of Catholic radio. So when I had the opportunity to host a sort of volunteer sort of based youth and young adult themed show for our local Catholic radio station here, I went in to do it. I had a little thing planned, and the station manager gets there. He gets me all set up, and he does it. And I do my thing, and he gets to the end, turns it off, takes his headphones off. He's like, "Are you sure you've never done this before?" And I just feel the confidence went up there. I was like, "Well, I kind of get what sounds good. I mean, just I know what I like to hear, and so that led to a 6 or 7 year, and I was doing all that like when we first got married. I was doing it remotely, so I hosted a youth and young adult themed show that was primarily interview based, in like half hour every 2 weeks.
Okay.
And it was great. I got to interview all kinds of folks, and local and some more national folks that's, I managed to get in there. And then I was having so much fun doing that, but I started to feel like, I don't want to get, I kind of feel more called to do more, than just the sort of teen stuff, the teen youth and
Mm,
young adult
mm.
stuff. And I was hitting a point where I finally realized what it was one day. I was hitting a point where just something felt off. I was in class. I was like, what? Just something's different. And that's when it hit me for the first time that I was getting to a point in my life where I was more like their dad than their cool older brother. And the
Okay.
psychological kind of transformation that was happening at that time. And I was newly married. We had a kid on the way. And I'm like, I feel more like dad now than older brother. And as that was happening, I was like, there's other things I want to explore too. And some of these, what now I know are these classical education things I didn't have a name for at the time. And like great literature and film and deeper sort of spiritual warfare kind of themes and mysteries like the Shroud of Turin, these kinds of things.
Yes.
And so I started just doing an audio podcast because that's, I was doing it for the radio. So I just had the same equipment and I would kind of start doing my own thing. And really just a couple of years ago at this point now, after I'd been doing that for years, all audio, I started dabbling with the YouTube stuff. And I really quickly found, what, like I can get a lot more bang for my buck here if I do the video, have it look kind of cool,
Yes.
and then just, pull the audio off it and put them out in these two formats so that,
Yeah.
people who
Absolutely.
like, these different venues can get something different out of it. So now I've been doing this video primarily for about 3 or 4 years now.
Okay.
And really just in the last year, I finally kind of hit that monetization point on YouTube, and with a few Shroud videos that really, hit pretty big. And more recently, these interviews with exorcists, because that's really in the water right now.
Yes.
you
Yes.
know, I want to say
Uh,
unfortunately, but it's good to be able to get that word out.
I'd love to
So-
touch on some of those topics.
oh, please, yeah.
But so how often is the podcast? Is it weekly, monthly?
Yeah. I've alternated it over the years, but it's gotten to a point where just that's again ongoing discernment, right? That hard thing of like the pressure of like, oh, I feel like I should get it out this much, and just I've seen some good YouTube best practices that have gotten me to a point of like, this is what's reasonable for me to be able to do. Try not to worry too much about the growth. It hasn't started shrinking yet. So, so right now I'm doing, especially with the baby, coming soon, I'm trying to commit to, at least one good interview episode per month, and then a
Okay.
shorter, more of a long form, about an hour most of the time, and then a
Okay.
shorter form, kind of a roulette of spiritual topics of just me, in my capacity as teacher, evangelizer, what have you. Something a little shorter, 5, 10, 15, maybe minutes max. So like every other week to be consistent, but
Yeah.
try to get a headliner interview per month if I can. So
Yeah,
yeah.
fantastic. Oh wow. And so is it the podcast itself is the same as the website, the name? Can people
Yeah.
search that
So
and
right.
find?
Yeah. It's just if anyone goes on YouTube or any podcast aggregator,
Yeah.
Spotify, I think Google Podcasts, I think might not be around for a while longer. I've heard, I don't know, but
Okay.
tune in, Spotify, any of those, Apple, podcasts. And I forgot to mention this just because I'm also into, not all geek culture per se, but you see behind me all my Star Wars stuff for sure. And I am a
Absolutely.
continually aspiring Lord of the Rings fan. I have some of these flags up over here. I give you Gondor and the map and all that
Yeah, wow.
prancing ponies over here. You can, so I can't see it there too much, but I'm on SQPN. SQPN does the Father Roderick. Von Hogan started that network for all these like secrets of Middle Earth, secrets of Star Wars, secrets of Doctor Who, all those kinds of secrets of shows, and that's a great Catholic network that I've dabbled in quite a bit. I've been on the Secrets of Star Wars show for the last 3 years, where we just
Oh
unpack
wow.
from a perspective of faith and everything, and taking a little break from that just for a while with the baby coming up, but. That's fun too. We'll
Yeah, I
sign
imagine.
up sometimes for like if there's a particular movie, like Dom Bettinelli, the CEO, will put out a huge like Excel sheet of like, okay, here's like 100 more movies. Who else wants to sign up? So, you'll look over like, oh yeah, okay. And you sign up for it, and 2 months
Wow.
later, 8 months, a year later, it just depends on when he gets to it. He'll email you like, hey, you still want to, so I think I did
Wow.
me and him and a friend of ours, Andrew Hermes from Catholic Answers, we all did the Godfather movies, like deep dives for like an hour and a
Oh
half
wow.
on each of them. And so, yeah, so these are just, like it's a world I enjoy the, the media, or medium of all this to be able to talk about these things and share them to these different
Yeah.
audiences.
Fascinating.
And so,
Wow.
yeah, but the Great Gracious Guest is where you can get all the YouTube and the podcast stuff. SQPN, you could find me on there too.
Okay. All right. We'll put
Yeah.
links in our description.
Yeah.
Um, I mean, we're coming to the end here, but I don't want to finish
Yeah.
without asking you to just a few of the interesting topics you mentioned already.
Yeah.
Shroud of Turin, and then exorcisms and things. And I remember
Yeah.
sharing with you about my encounter with the Shroud of Turin and that image on the tabernacle. But discovering more and more about this topic is just fascinating. And
Yeah.
even more now in 2023, what we're discovering versus, 1990 and 1980 and 1970.
Yeah.
It's just so interesting. Tell us what really surprised you about the Shroud of Turin. What was one or two
Yeah.
like really standout, surprising facts that you
I
discovered?
think I think just the more I've learned about the anatomical accuracy of all the wounds,
Yeah.
and the uniqueness of that set of them. Because a lot of people will say in the comments, I'll have these different shroud folks on, you'll inevitably get somebody who says, hey, a lot of people were crucified. What's the big deal? And it's like, yes, they were, but like you're overlooking the fact that the only person in history that we have any record of having all of those specific injuries inflicted is Jesus, and that's something to consider.
Yes.
The evidence for the crown of thorns, the no broken bones, the precise placement of the wounds on the hands, in accordance with what we now know about Roman crucifixion, as opposed to what ostensibly you would have seen in artwork of the Middle Ages if it was a hoax, where it would have been
Yes.
right through the hand instead of down here up to the median nerve. Um, so yeah, that's been fascinating. I've had a couple medical experts and folks on talking about that, but also how it matches the Sudarium, so well in Spain, and the 3D image stuff just blows my mind. And some of
Yes.
the theories about that. So that's been quite an impressive topic, and I've got a couple more people I'm in talks with right now to bring on to talk about some more aspects of it as well.
Yeah,
So
brilliant.
yeah,
Highly recommend people check
yeah,
that out. So you've got this
yeah.
in the archive, so people can go back and look at some of your
Yeah.
previous shows on
If you
all of
just
the.
if you tell gracious guest Shroud, it's going to give you. I think oh man, it's probably 15 interviews or more, maybe
Wow.
20 over the last 2 years.
Yeah,
And I
cool.
never planned it. I just put up a summary of a little unit I'd given in my class right before Holy Week because I wanted to use it as a meditation on the suffering of Christ. And that was the first video that went beyond, like, most of my videos had a few dozen views or maybe 100 or 200 after months, and I was like,
Mm.
oh, cool. And then that one hit like 1,000 and then 2,000. It just kept going. And so there's most of my Shroud videos are in the sort of thousands or even 20s, plus
Yeah,
1,000
nice.
views, which comparatively is so many more than usual,
Yeah,
but I do
fantastic.
have a twist on that number for you in a moment here.
Okay. Well, tell us. So you got a range of guests. You've
Hmm.
recently had some on the topic of exorcism.
Yeah.
Do you want to share a bit about that and why there also
Yeah.
seems to be a lot of interest, whether that's a good thing or not, but people
Yeah.
wanting to know more about this. It's always been a hot topic to talk about.
Sure. Yeah. Well, and it's I forget why the idea came to me, but we have an exorcist in our diocese, Father John Zeta, and you can
Mhm.
find him online too. He's very open. More of them are, I think, more and more. They used to be.
Okay.
It would be a closely guarded secret, right? Of who was the
Yeah.
exorcist, and understandably, because I've heard so many interviews with them where they'll say, "Look, the overwhelming majority of calls we get are not something that we need to
Yeah.
deal with, but better safe than sorry." But Father Zeta, it's Szada, and
Okay.
you can't miss him because he looks like one of the guys from ZZ Top. He's I don't know how old he is, but he's full cassock priest. He's a big guy and a huge gray beard,
Wow.
and long hair and everything. Like he's an interesting looking person. So I think that's one of the reasons that video caught people's eye. But I did that back last summer, and it did pretty well. But almost as well as like a Shroud video, which was my way
Okay.
of measuring, right? And then we go on vacation, and I checked stats at one point, and the thing just exploded. I don't know what happened. It hit some algorithm thing in August, and to date, that one's well over 70,000 views. I mean, it's exponentially my most viewed video. Like it just put
Yes.
all the Shroud ones in the dust, and that got my attention because I thought, well, here you go, because this is really important to a lot of people,
Mm, mm.
and I struggle sometimes. I might be tempted to be like, oh, am I just being falling for the clickbait thing? Am I just trying to get views? But by the same token, it's like, well, what am I doing this for? Like
Yeah.
I'm specifically doing this to try to get the gospel out to people. And Father Zeta, he's a phenomenal exorcist, and he's so knowledgeable on that topic, but he's so mild mannered and so down to earth, and he has a PhD in psychology also. So
That
he's
helps.
speaking
Wow.
very, intelligently about, this dispelling a lot of the rumors about how the process goes. So I just found it a delightful chat about the whole topic and spiritual warfare. Very encouraging. He did share some scary things, some things he's seen, but that wasn't the point of it. And the greatest blessing of all was he mentioned and emailed to me a few weeks later that he had a number of people reach out to him because they had seen the interview.
Wow.
And
Okay.
to me, like that's, I mean, touchdown, like
Yes,
that's
absolutely.
wonderful. And so that led to then Father Lampert, Vincent Lampert's probably the
Yeah.
most, kind of outspoken. He's all over the place.
Yeah, that's
And
right. We had him a year or two
is
ago,
that
and
right?
he had his book that came out. He's
Yes.
fantastic.
He's
Yeah,
and
I
he's
got
so
a
funny because I just like
link.
some people were like friends were like, how did you get Father Lampert? I said, I emailed him. I said, he emailed me
Yeah,
back in like 10 minutes. He's like, yeah, sure, I'll come on. I
he's
said,
awesome.
he was like one of the easiest people to book ever. But in that video also, that one did much better in the short term, like right away than Father Zeta's, I think, just because Father Lampert's more known. So both of those right now are really, still, kind of climbing. They got a good audience for them. And, but yeah,
Yeah.
it's, I think
There's a
my
few more
biggest
out there. Any
single,
plans for others? I know Father
yes. Yeah.
Carla, Father
Now
Rippinger, they
I
seem to be
emailed,
out prominent.
Father Rippinger, I emailed or Ripperger. I know he's very busy. He directed
Yeah.
me to a colleague of his that I'm going to be in touch with, but that one
Okay.
might just be audio because he doesn't really do video usually.
Okay.
And then,
Okay.
yeah, a couple others. I know Lila Rose had a priest on. I can't remember his name off the top of my head. I'm trying to get in touch with. And Father Martins, who's doing that Exorcist Files podcast, which has been really interesting. Father Carlos Martins, he's
Yes.
very busy too. He does all those
Yes.
relics.
Amazing.
Yeah. So, but that's definitely a topic I want to come back to more and more. We're going to talk about Noah's flood. We're going to talk about.
Wow.
I have a Christmas episode coming out soon. I'm interviewing tomorrow a gentleman who's an expert on the Tilma of Guadalupe.
Oh, wow.
So it's just
Fascinating.
it's so fun to be able to explore all these different wide ranging kinds of mysteries of
Absolutely.
faith and go deeper. So yeah,
Yeah, I love this.
yeah,
It's all what you're doing. You're tapping into areas of interest that what they do. A couple of things. I think, for me personally, it reaffirms what we know in the Gospels. It reaffirms the invisible world that is around us, that we are part of. That there is a spiritual reality, and
yeah,
and these sort of coincide in human history. Actual things where the supernatural and the natural come together, and you almost got like evidence now that
right,
solid that you can see, it's tangible,
yeah,
touch and feel and experience and record, and this is not just make believe stuff here. This
no.
is impacting lives. So that
Well, and
that
can I
that,
share one before I forget? And I know we're running out of time here, but this blew my mind because Father Martin's, anyone who listens to the Exorcist Files podcast, which again, there's disturbing stuff because they recreate changing the names and circumstances so they're not
mm,
breaching any trust or anything, but for catechetical purposes to a broad, just general audience, it's phenomenal, and they recreate these scenes, and it's creepy because it's like if you have AirPods in, it's like you're hearing it and stuff.
yeah,
But he said he was talking about the relics, and he said he had someone send him anonymously what they claimed to be a very very tiny shred or piece of the Shroud of Turin,
mm,
which if it is the shroud, they probably shouldn't have it. You know what I mean? Like it's one of those things where he didn't know where it came from, and he knows Dr. John Jackson out
okay,
in Colorado. Who was headed up STIRP and everything, and or on the STIRP team back in 1978 to examine the shroud. So he said he sent it to Dr. Jackson to kind of examine it and basically try to give him the best take he could. Does this look like it's a legitimate piece of the shroud? And he said Dr.
mm,
Jackson was pretty confident. He couldn't tell for 100% sure maybe, but said like it really does look like it is. So he kept it with him, and he said during one of his exorcisms the thing was being super stubborn, and he applied this piece of the shroud, and he said the demon manifested and just went rigid, and it looked almost like it was compelled to do so. It put itself into the shape of the body on the shroud,
wow,
like with the hands crossed over. And again, it's not like it's an image. I mean, it was just like a thread, and he didn't tell
yeah,
the thing where it came from, and he just touched it, and it immediately like made itself shroud shaped and was really like, restricted. And I was like, that is crazy.
wow.
So,
You
yeah, that
can't
was
ignore
cool.
things like that when that sort of thing is happening. I
No.
mean,
Yeah. I
that's got to
mean,
get people thinking,
absolutely. Asking some good
Wow.
questions at least, or questioning their assumptions, their reductionist assumptions, that kind of thing, the
Yes.
materialism. Yeah.
Wow. Well, it's
Yeah.
exciting now. What's next? Just
Yeah.
in as we wrap up,
Yeah.
final thoughts. Like what I find is it's so interesting. You've got a. I love how you share different aspects of the faith through your podcast. And what can we see long term? So audiobooks, are they on the horizon? I'd love to hear
I hope
some
so.
books that you're reading out. I
Yeah.
would attest to that. But what other projects, things in the horizon?
Yeah. Well, a couple things. Just in the interest of time, well, now and for me, kind of this stage of my life, I just can't really find a lot of time right now to sit down and really write much originally. I have
Mm,
some things I've kind of shelved just temporarily, kind of follow ups to that narrative reflections book. I'm a few chapters into an Old Testament one where I
okay.
picked some characters, some expected, some not expected, from the Old Testament where like the one I have out, it's called Return of the Lord. That's the one with the apostles, whereas that's this direct encounter with Christ and kind of their last moment. I thought, well, if you're Old Testament, what are you doing? You're anticipating, right? You're seeing these glimmers, these little seeds of these deeper currents that are going to kind of come to fruition in the new covenant. And so
Yeah.
it's very family centric, like these imperfect family relationships, that are striving for this fulfillment. So there's a few, and I finished the a Rahab chapter that
Oh, wow.
I'm particularly proud of, and my wife was just like, "This is," and she's my biggest fan, but also, she's a great critic too. She doesn't just tell me, "Oh, that's nice,"
Yeah.
So that's one, but yeah, just some others. Like I said, audiobook stuff. I'd like to find out, how do you do audio Catholic audiobooks? So
Yeah.
I'm looking into that more.
You're
To
thinking like
read
dramatized
them.
a little bit as well in the way in expression.
Perhaps.
Yeah.
But I think it just kind of depends, because
Yeah.
I feel like that's a whole other level. I mean, I'm capable of doing different voices and stuff. I do, and I read to the kids and all this kind of stuff, and that's like with some of the theater background, but I would never put myself out there as someone who's, maybe professionally capable with that, but who knows, why not flex that muscle a little bit or exercise that? It's something that's an interesting thing. I think would be a lot of fun to be able to do, as a little side project, if nothing else.
Oh,
So,
I'll pray for that. I mean,
yeah.
I'll pray.
Yeah,
That's
no, thank
exciting.
you.
So
Yeah.
just finally, that website again for those who just
Yep.
one last time.
So the graciousguest.org, it's Ephesians 3:17, that Christ may dwell in your hearts through faith. And that's the whole ministry is based on, I want to be a gracious guest in this life, and everywhere I look around me, I have that faith that there's something he's trying to speak to me through, whether it's a great book, a great movie, a great conversation, food. So those are all fair game on the show.
Awesome. All right.
So,
graciousguest.org. All right. We'll
Yeah.
put that down below. And I really hope people go and check it out and support that website and the podcast and just the whole apostle in general.
Yeah. Thank you so much.
Thank you for joining us today and praying for you. Pray for us and wishing you a blessed end of year and a new year. It's
Yes.
coming up as we enter into this season.
Yeah. You too. Thank you so much, Charbel. I really appreciate it. I'll pray for you as well.
Thank you so much. Thanks, everyone. I hope you got a bit out of that and inspired just to hear a beautiful story of faith, but also what we can all do once you just serve, give yourself over to God, and then what God can do through you. And I think it should inspire many of us that to start whatever God is calling you to do. So that's another Parousia podcast. I'm Charbel Raish, your host. Until next time, God bless.